Alrighty, good afternoon and thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar, New Teachers Surviving the Schedule, presented by Dr. Elizabeth Potts and Dr. Lori Howard. My name is Naya Hyde and I'm a marketing assistant here at Books Publishing, who is today's sponsor for this webinar. All right, if you're not already a member of Teaching All Students community, we would love for you to join so you can have access to more webinars like this one and some special content and offers. Speaking of special offers, we are offering a 20% discount at brookspublishing.com with code edwebph. This offer excludes our trainings, pre-discounted items, and online products, but it's good on everything else. We are also going to be giving away 3 free copies of Launching a Career in Special Education. The winners will be selected at random from the chat and will be announced tomorrow via email. Without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce today's presenters, Dr. Elizabeth Potts and Lori Howard. Dr. Elizabeth Potts earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Liberal Studies and a Master's degree in Education, with an emphasis in special education from Longwood College in Virginia. She earned a doctoral degree with an emphasis on mild disabilities from the University of Virginia and has spent time as faculty at the University of Virginia, Marshall University, and now Missouri Western State University in St. Joseph, Missouri. Dr. Lori A. Howard began her career in special education working with deaf and hearing impaired students. Subsequently, she earned a doctoral degree from the University of Virginia in educational psychology. Currently, she is an associate professor of special education at Marshall University. She is also a team member for the MU Access Project, focused on using technology to increase accessibility for all people. Welcome, Elizabeth and Lori, and thank you so much for being here.
Hi. Gosh, as I'm looking at where everybody is from and everything, I'm realizing we made a very US-centric poll question about where people are from. So I think a lot of people are going to end up using the other selection with that. Lori, go ahead.
Yes. Actually, I think we start with why are you here today? And just go ahead and click on the reason that you might be here, being a mentor for a new teacher, being a new teacher in your first year, beginning teacher, or other, just so that we get a sense of who the audience might be. We're really excited to learn more about you so that we can help solve the kinds of issues you may be having.
Let's see. Oh, several pre-service teachers. That's great. Looks like we've got a lot more other. So a lot of people in roles we didn't anticipate, which is always fun. Supervisors, great librarians.
Looks like we have some elementary and secondary education students, which is really cool because they'll get to have a little insight of what's coming when they graduate.
Well, and truly a lot of the things that we talk about today are going to help with all new teachers and maybe even experienced teachers too, kind of protecting and organizing your time. Teacher for 35 years, great. Pre-service, someone who's retired. Well, thank you for joining us in your retirement. That's lots of fun. Lori, you want to go to the next question?
The next question is, what are your scheduling concerns? So just type your thoughts into the chat box so that we can get a sense of, we all complain about the schedule and we all deal with the schedule, but some of us have very specific concerns and we're looking to get a sense of what your concerns might be to make sure that we can highlight what we think might be a helpful strategy for your concerns. So just go ahead and type it into the chat box. I believe it's pretty easy to find the chat box. You basically are going to be at the left side of your screen if you look at the computer, and then oh, fabulous. You guys have got a lot of good stuff going on. So go ahead and just type in what you've got and send it all. And welcome. Oh, this is really great.
Yeah.
How can we get more time? That's called space-time continuum and probably something to do with Einstein. But we'll talk about ways we can have the time we have. Yes. scheduling is a challenge and one that we have all struggled with. I used to tell people that my first year of teaching, I actually was doing my laundry at 3 o'clock in Wednesday mornings because I could do a load of laundry while I was finishing up my lesson plans for the end of the week and then get to school by 7:30. So I totally understand how hard this can be.
Yeah, and I'm seeing lots of the work balance or work-life balance piece, and a lot of that is recognize that the first year is harder and different than all of the other years in terms of preparation. It's going to take you longer, and after you've been doing this a few years, time should even out a little bit, and you won't have to work quite so hard to find that work-life balance, which is great. Um, so, should we move on? Or Naya, I think that second poll is just the where they're from, right? And they actually have been doing a great job telling us where they're from. So I think we can probably just skip that. Um, okay.
In the beginning, this is like things you need to think about when you get your first job because you're so excited. Some of the first things you need to think about is on this checklist. You need to get a parking pass. I know that sounds crazy, but it's like the logistics. You need to make sure, and I tell people to do this their very first day, you want to make friends with the principal's secretary, the office staff, and the custodians. Because when you mess up your classroom, and trust me, accidents, science, crazy stuff's going to happen, those are the people that you're going to make friends with so that they can help you get it cleaned up. You might also want to take time that first week to introduce yourself to school psychologists, the social workers. Anyway, what we've done is created a little checklist to basically give you some ideas of the things you want to do on the day that you maybe get oriented with HR for the district, the first day of school, and then look at kind of the other things you're going to do that first week. I always say you've got to know where the copier is, you need to know where the bathroom is, and you need to know how to get stuff for your classroom. Again, if you get to make friends with the school principal secretary or one of the administrative assistants, you're going to have a lot of that help for when you have the, oh, where do I find the paper for my classroom? Or, oh gosh, I forgot I needed a whiteboard marker. Or, oh wow, how do I make the smart board work the way I want it to? So that's kind of how we want you to think about that first kind of, think about the day before or the day that you're at HR, then your first day of school, because, I always think about being the shiny penny of walking in with, oh, it's the first day of school. And when you're the teacher, it's even more exciting. So you want to think about how you can do that and make it work for you.
And probably some of you are looking at that and going, wow, that would have been helpful a month ago before school started. But it does look like we've got a bunch of pre-service teachers, so that's great. At this point in the year, maybe the new teachers are still in the honeymoon period. And if you haven't started your first year teaching yet, you're going to spend some time getting settled, learning those routines, learning how things operate in school before you can really get into a good rhythm. And where you are in the process between starting, learning everything, and everything going swimmingly until surviving and making it to winter break depends on what your planning priorities are. So there is a time where just getting through the day is going to be your priority, and you can't think about long-term things until you figure out how to work your daily routine yet. So early on, you need to work on that daily routine, and then you start to get in the stride of, okay, this is what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing every day. I at least feel confident enough that I've got time for what has to be done every day. And then you start looking at, okay, let me do some things long term that are going to save me down the road.
So it really is a balance between everyday teaching and your daily planning and your long-term planning. Your daily planning is how do I get into the reading lesson, or how do I get into the math lesson? What materials do I need to have for that? What kinds of assessments might I need to be giving? The long-term planning is you're going to have to think about things like, ooh, how am I going to collect data for those IEP goals to make sure that I'm meeting those goals, so that, wait a second, when is my IEP, the reevals needed for my IEP? How am I going to collect the data? When do I need to start thinking about scheduling those IEPs? And oh my gosh, I bet there's some issues with standardized testing I better be aware of if I've got kids in pullout. And how am I going to work all that in? But it really is a balance, because you've got to get through the day and make sure that you've done all the things you need to do with making sure you've got kids with routines, getting the grading done, getting the planning done for the next period, getting the materials taught, and simply delivering, by I always think it's odd that we always talk about this last, but actually doing the instruction. I mean, the actual teaching part is where we really want to spend a lot of our time, because that's kind of why we're teachers. But then there's all these other things that we have to balance and kind of try to manage. So
some of the things you need to manage in terms of daily planning. I'm sorry, I didn't rush you, did I?
oh no, you're good.
Okay. Um, so this slide is basically the things you need to think about in terms of daily planning, or it says daily, but it can be weekly. When are you going to communicate with parents? How are you going to communicate with them? You may have students who have a lot of needs, and so you may want to plan for regular and efficient communication with those parents. Or maybe you don't have students with a lot of need that would require communication often. So you still want to make sure that you plan for it, though, or you're going to kind of forget that those parents exist. And speaking as one of those parents, don't forget about us, because we all want to hear when things are going well. You also need to, in your daily planning, think about preparing your content. So try to make sure that you've got time set aside, and however that makes sense for you. I worked with a teacher who every Sunday afternoon for her entire teaching career, she would set aside a few hours, and that was her time to plan. Personally, I like to get to school extremely early, sometimes before the school was open, and work on my planning for an hour or 2 hours before students got there in the morning. And the longer you teach, the less time you're going to need for that daily piece. But figure out how it works into your schedule. Make sure you don't forget about materials. You can have a great plan, but not have your materials, and that's going to completely throw off the lesson and make it so that you're not as effective. So don't forget to think about gathering your materials. Don't forget to plan for formative assessment, because again, if we don't plan for it, we don't do it, and we need that information so that we can do a better job for our students. The same thing with collecting data for specific uses like IEP goals and behavior intervention plans. You don't want to get up against a deadline where you have to have this data because you have to report on progress towards a goal, and you have no data because you completely missed, because it got caught up in everything else that goes on, and you completely missed the step of collecting the data. So plan for that. Maybe on Tuesdays, that's when you always collect your data for this set of IEP goals. Or maybe every Wednesday and Thursday, you do all of your data collection related to all of the IEP goals you're responsible for. But get into a pattern. Don't forget, if you're working with a co-teacher, you got to have that co-planning time. We can't plan in a bubble if we're going to be teaching together. So you've got to have that time set aside. And again, having a routine for that is going to be really helpful. Same thing with providing guidance for paraprofessionals. We have some amazing, fabulous paraprofessionals, but if you don't have an opportunity to communicate to them what you want them to do, you're going to have some conflict. And so make sure that you have it in your realm, have it in your routine to consider what you're going to have the paraprofessional do and how you're going to provide that guidance. And reflection. We forget about reflection. Reflection gets lost, but the way that we improve and make things better, make ourselves better, is by reflecting on how things went. In your teacher prep program, you're going to learn or have learned or are learning how incredibly important reflection is. But probably the number one thing that slides once you get into a classroom is the time for reflection. Even if it's just, I'm driving on the way home from school and I think about, in a systematic way, what went well, where things are struggling, and how I can improve on that tomorrow. Make sure that you're building in time for your reflection, and not just on the lesson, but also on your teacher behaviors, because that's what you can change, are those teaching behaviors. So some of the ways to have time to look at all of those things are to literally set aside time for that planning and then protect it. Protect your planning time. Do not count on your planning period, because I guarantee you people know when you have time off, and they're going to come and they're going to ask you questions, and all of a sudden your time's going to be gone, or you're going to have to go to the bathroom, or you're going to have to make copies, and you're not going to be able to use that time for planning all the time. But maybe you set that time aside once a week. You close the door, you turn the lights off, you pretend you're not in the room, or you find another place in the building that you can work without being disrupted, maybe the library. But make sure that you protect the time that you've set aside and make a predictable pattern for when you're going to work on your lesson planning. Another thing, we talk about structure a lot and how structure is good for our students, but it's good for us too. It becomes easier to plan lessons if you have the same structure or similar structure every day, so that you are able to get into a habit of, okay, I need to think about A, then B, then C. I need to have an activity, and it needs to reinforce that objective that I introduced when students walked in the door. And then we need to close where they're teaching the information to somebody else, whatever your normal pattern is. And then another strategy would be, we talked about collecting data. Collecting data is really, really important, but make it as simple as you can by putting it into your daily routine. Again, it could be your weekly routine instead, but making it routine. If you have a seating chart on a clipboard, as you walk around the room, you can make little notes about different students and their behaviors and what they need. You can also use Post-it notes to make notes on, put some tape on your hand and make notes. I love ballpoint pens, and I really don't like gel pens, but ballpoint pens do not work well when you have tape on your hand. A gel pen or a felt tip pen or a Sharpie works best, and then you just need to be careful not to smudge it. But that's something that all you have to carry in that case is the writing instrument, and you can make notes on your hand really easily and then transfer them later. You can also collect data by saying, okay, today I'm going to look at how well Johnny raises his hand, and you've got paper clips in your pockets, and you move a paper clip every time Johnny raises his hand, and then at the end of the day, you count paper clips and you know how many times Johnny raised his hand. The key with data collection and keeping it simple is not to overthink. If it seems too easy to be true, well, then let's do it, okay? More routines and ways to build routines in. Apps are really big, and so using an app and posting to a parent app is going to be a good way to have great communication and make it your routine. Because if it's not a routine, you're going to forget about it, and it'll be 3 weeks before parents have heard from you, and they're going to be distressed, might be a word, or confused, or feel like they're just not in the loop about what's going on in class. You can even have weekly newsletters set them up like a month in advance. You know what's going to be going on in your classroom because you've had some time to plan, and you can have them set up. And so all you have to do is press send, or go ahead and have it set so that they'll send on a timeline. Set aside time to reply to email. Set aside time to reply to phone calls. My contention is if you're teaching, your students need to have your attention, and we shouldn't be in, near, on the computer unless we're using that as part of instruction. So once students walk in that door, we can't access email. We shouldn't be looking at things. If something's really and truly important, somebody's going to come and tell you. And so concentrate on your kids, but you have to have time to address those emails. So set some time aside at some point in a predictable time and pattern during the day. Schedule daily check-ins with collaborators. So same things. If you're working with a teacher, you're the special ed teacher, and there's a student in Mr. Humanis's room, make sure that you have time set aside. Like, okay, on Wednesdays, I'm going to check in with you as soon as contract time starts, and we're going to chat for 15 minutes. And the opposite is true too. You're that general education classroom teacher, and you know that you need to have some communication with the special ed teacher. Set aside some time and make sure that you do it on a regular routine and have that scheduled and protected like an appointment. A way to build routine for reflection, make notes immediately. Once students start their independent work, take a minute and a half and write down some notes immediately before you forget, and so that it's just part of that routine. And then start doing your check-in with students to make sure that they are on track and don't have questions. And as I said before, you can also always think about what you're doing and do your reflection when you're in the car, because we all have those times where we feel like we're not doing anything. Well, let's make it productive. And I find to-do lists very helpful. Not everybody does, but they can be helpful both for making sure that you get done what needs to be done today, but also planning for the future. Like if I have a long-term project, breaking it into parts and setting little mini deadlines for myself is going to be helpful. And then you can also do some self-evaluation and self-assessment and check to see how well you've been progressing by using that to-do list. And then this is a way to use a lesson plan to support your communication with a paraprofessional. So this is an example of a lesson plan, and this is the paraprofessionals schedule. So there's the time and then the task, the general thing that they're doing, and then what you are asking the paraprofessional to do during that time, because it may change from one day to another, especially with that level of support. We find that that's one of the hardest things to communicate to paraprofessionals is when we need to be removing some support from a student. And so writing it down can be helpful. And if you do it at the same time you do your lesson plan, that's going to increase communication between the two parties and really help students be most successful.
All right, so all of those are really good suggestions. And when we get to long-term planning, which is when we're having to think maybe 3 months ahead or even 6 months ahead to the end of the school year, one of the things that should be the top of your priority list is your IEP data collection. You're going to have to write that present level of functional assessment and performance. And I'm sorry, I'm old. It was
achievement
in my world. It was present level of performance in my level, but it's achievement and a performance now. They keep changing the language. IEPs are a daily part of our life when we are special ed teachers, and we have got to make sure that we build that data collection in. And one of the nice things that I say is if you think in 3-week blocks and make sure that you're checking maybe every 3 weeks on some data collection for an IEP goal, you'll probably have enough to really be able to figure it out. And even if you can't do it every 3 weeks, think about trying to do something in that third week block so that you're getting a sample along the way. So the first thing with long-term planning is IEP data collection. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
Oh,
forgot I was
that's okay.
driving.
You were driving. Yes, I'm sorry. You also, I'm sorry, I had expiration dates and I was like, what expiration? Okay. We want to know about IEP expiration dates. So when the IEPs are coming up, we all know that they're time sensitive and they are time driven in terms of our notices with parents and feedback with parents and getting them set up. And of course, the more people you have in an IEP meeting, the more time it takes to get the meeting scheduled. So you want to take a look very early in your school year as to when those IEPs are coming due so that you have a handle on that. The other thing that I think, and I actually tell people, I would try to get some of this done the summer before you even start. Think about your unit plans. Think about the scope and sequence of your curriculum. And I like to have one or two plans that maybe I've worked on over the summer that know are ready to go so that when things get crazy, I've got something already done with the planning. And again, I really recommend, and it doesn't always work with scope and sequence, but 3-week plannings for units is a great way to think about it because it gives you time that if there's one of those fire drill days or one of those days that's a spirit day where there's a big assembly in the classroom, if you've planned for 3 weeks and you're really on a 2-week thing, you've got time for those days to happen that you can't always predict. You don't always know what the fire drill days are going to be ahead of time. You don't know, particularly depending upon where you are, snow days or days when school may be closed and how to push it. So if you do 3 weeks and plan for it, you'll probably do really good at getting through with a 2-week sequence. Grading period cycle, again, figure that out. If you're having to do grades every 9 weeks or every 18 weeks, you need to figure out what that cycle is. And I would try to sync that with your data collection and your grading. You also need to remember the school calendar. There's going to be like a spring break. There's going to be some sort of holiday break. There may be other holidays in there. There may be teacher work days. There may be teacher in service days. You need to get a calendar, and it can be physical. It can be electronic. Different people have different ways of using the calendar, and I don't think there's a one size fits all, but put those dates on as soon as you know them. Because once you block out time in your calendar and then you stand back and you can look at the whole year or month by month, you can tell how much time you have to actually get stuff accomplished when you have the planning time to even just look at it. But one of the first things you should do is as soon as the school puts out their calendar, put it on your calendar so that you can sync up the calendars so that you know when you need to plan for things. For example, I know this is terrible, but I taught elementary. I always had Halloween the day after and the day before blocked out on my calendar because once students are on a sugar high, you're going to lose some time. You've got to think about what you're going to be teaching the day of and then the day after. And I know that there's a movement to change Halloween to like always a Thursday or something, but um, whatever happens, just know that there are certain things that are going to happen throughout the year that you need to adjust for in your classroom instruction. Probably not a good day on the day after Halloween to have a major unit test given. Probably not the best timing for that. You also need to recognize when you're doing long-term planning that your colleagues, whether it's the speech therapist, the school psych, your co-teacher, a paraprofessional, their calendar is probably just as full as yours. And you have to find a way to make sure that you've allowed some time in there. And I actually tell people to try to schedule that ahead of time too. Like figure out something like, oh, I'm always going to meet with the speech therapist on Tuesday afternoons. The third Tuesday of every month, I'm going to check my caseload with the school psychologist to make sure. That doesn't mean that things won't come up in between that, but that way you know you're going to have time, or you and the other person have scheduled time to do sort of that catch up that we never feel like we have time for. And it goes on as a regular meeting on your calendar. And that's another way to sort of manage and get on top of that time thing. Same thing for those of us that may be new teachers, or actually it happens a lot, but is worrying about the observation times when you know that as a new teacher you are going to be observed by mentor teachers and principals. Get those on your calendar so that you know. Simply knowing that you've got an observation scheduled will help kind of reduce the stress of that whole thing. Some other long-term strategies, again, doesn't matter if it's electronic or paper, but we're putting on the screen right now an example and then making some notes about how you can actually make it work for you, so that you've got a real understanding of how you're juggling both your long-term strategies of collecting your data and then how you're going to do your daily planning, and you can see it. Some people like to color code, some people that doesn't work for. What I tell people is find what works for you and make the calendar work for you. I actually had a colleague who used to put stickers on their calendar to remind them of different things. If stickers are your thing, go for it. If color coding is your thing, use it. If it makes you go crazy to think about, remember it. Oh yeah, I put this in green because of this, and you have to remember what the color stands for. Might not be a good idea to use color, because then you're going to be confusing yourself. So just do the calendar that works for you the way it works for you. It's not going to work the same for everybody. It used to be that we carried around these big binder books of calendars where there were tabs, and then there were things you moved around, and then you would, have it where it was correlated to an index in the back. I got to tell you, I could never manage that. I was the person that had your basic kind of like wall calendar, and I was making notes, and then I was putting stickies all over the calendar. That was probably not really effective either, but at least I had something in paper that I could go back to. So what goes on the calendar? This is important. You want to get grading periods, IEP due dates, holidays, school breaks, unit plan goals, and we noticed in this one we put in pencil because you may need to change that. And if you know that you're going to be out, for example, you have a family vacation that's going to spill over on spring break, you want to make sure you mark that on your calendar so that you remember to do your plans, so that somebody who may have to come in and fill in for your class knows what goes there. Throughout the year, you're going to want to put down faculty meetings, trainings, faculty, work days and services, testing. What day are you going to give tests? And again, there should be consideration given to what's happening in that week. If it is a week that's Spirit Week, that's not always a good day, a good time to test. On the other hand, that may be the best time for you for that unit or for whatever that test might be. You need to get the planning with collaborators on your calendar. And yes, you need to remember to put parent meetings on that calendar as soon as possible. Parents have to juggle their own schedules, and they have to figure out how to coordinate and come to school. They may have to arrange childcare. You need to be accommodating to parents as much as possible. And anything that is on your school's master schedule, get it on the calendar. Same thing with any kind of observations that may be happening, whether you personally are being observed or whether the school psych is coming in to observe a student that you have in common who maybe has some issues that need to be addressed, or they are contemplating doing a behavior intervention plan for. But again, make the calendar work for you. Don't work for the calendar. So some other long-term strategies. Again, they kind of mirror what we talk about with the daily strategies. When are you going to plan units? And again, I really recommend doing 2 or 3 of your units over the summer, so that you have something banked and that you can figure out once every 3 weeks or once a week, I'm going to really sit down and not worry about daily planning, but I'm going to look at unit planning. You need regular planning time with any co-teachers. The more co-teachers you have, the more complicated your planning gets. So you've got to find a way to make time for all of them. Now, if you only have one co-teacher, it becomes a little easier because you'll start to be able to do like sticky notes or quick check-ins and do your planning a little bit in more smaller bits as you go through the day. If you have multiple co-teachers, you're going to have to literally sit down with each of them to make sure each of those classes are running really well. Schedule your check-ins with your specialist. Again, I believe in planning those. I believe that it's really hard for a lot of people to get caught on the fly. I cannot tell you how many times, and you probably have this happen yourselves, that when you're teaching, you're on the way to maybe make tea so that you can sit down and have tea and think about your planning. And as your water is microwaving, somebody is asking you about a student when you were thinking planning. So try to, and guess sometimes that's the best way to do it, but sometimes that's a little hard. So you need to try to find regular ways to do that. Look at your long-term plan at least once a week. Don't have to look at it every day, don't have to even deal with it every day, but you do need to sort of review it and say, how am I coming on these things, and what are the first 3 things I need to get done on my long-term list, if you're a list maker. But just make sure you think about it at least once a week.
So there have been some good conversations in the chat box about different people asking about different tech, potential tech connections. And so we have a few for you, not for the specific structure that you all are talking about in the chat, though. So it will hopefully dovetail well with that. As you said, sometimes there are things that you have to do regularly, but they get lost if you have to remember to do it. So why not set up an automatic email or an automatic alert if you're using an app to automatically send out the request for data, or to automatically set up ticklers to help you schedule IEP meetings. And it could be you will go ahead and put together the email that's going to go to the parent and the administrator as you're scheduling something, or excuse me, you send an email to yourself, hey, you don't forget to do this. I use email to remind myself of things a lot. Although also, let's see, I more often now use an alarm on my phone or an alarm on my calendar, and actually will block off time on my schedule that says, hey, send these emails today. And how you do that for automatic email depends a lot on what your email provider is, but very often you can put the email together, and then somewhere in the send section, you can say delay send and have it not send until you're ready for it to send at the point in the future. Or if that's complicated or your email doesn't have that function, you can set it up and just let it hang out in your draft folder and set an alarm on your calendar to remind you to send that email out that's in your draft function. I'm going to own up to it. I even set an alarm for every single day to take my child to school because I'm terrified we're going to miss the bus. And so using alarms for even daily measures, like it's really easy to lose track of time in the morning. And so even an alarm that goes off 3 minutes before the students are supposed to be able to come into the building might be a good idea if you have a hard time making it to your classroom before students come in the building. We also suggest that you color code electronic calendars. As Lori was saying, you can, of course, do it with a physical calendar also, but with an electronic calendar, it can be easier because you can have bigger chunks of time that are different colors. And so you can tell very easily at a glance, oh, that's a collaboration meeting, or that's a faculty meeting, or, oh, parents coming in. That means I really need to do some preparation for it. And color coding, you've got one color for meetings that are going to require action for you or homework for you to prepare in advance. So color coding can be really useful to get a quick idea of what's coming up in the next week without reading all of the things that you've written on the calendar.
And make sure you're comfortable with what the colors are, because sometimes it gets really confusing and you spend more time trying to figure out, oh, why is it green versus why did I do blue there? So get consistent about it.
Yeah, consistency is important. Consistency is definitely important. And as we said, there are a lot of apps that can help with your preparation and time management. And we considered going through lists, but there are so many, and they all operate a little differently and might be better for one person than another. I've played, for instance, with a lot of list apps. Trello is one that I've used and tried to use, but it didn't exactly fit my needs. But I know there are a lot of people who really just make all of their lists with Trello and find it incredibly useful. But there's an app out there for you, and there's an app that's going to fit your needs and be easy for you to use. So we'd encourage you to explore and ask other people what they use, because then you may be able to share some things. And that's actually a nice thing about Trello. You can share lists with other people. So if you were working on a big project together, you could kind of jointly say, okay, I've done this, you're in charge of this, and have it all be in one place.
Protecting your time. Here's a question for all of you. How do you make sure that you do protect your planning time? Just go
Write it
ahead
in the
and tap
box.
into the text
Yeah.
box and let us know. You guys there's a lot of good chat going on here. I hope that the recording captures that, because there's some really good suggestions. Close my door, absolutely, and close your email. Yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah.
By learning to say no. That's that's like the first one. If you learn
I don't
that,
have
you'll
that
be
one
in good shape.
mastered.
Yeah.
Turning
Yeah.
off
And that
lights. Yeah,
is the
pretending
hardest
you're
thing,
not
is
there.
saying no. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you can't be a
Getting to
good
work from
teacher if you don't get your planning time in. So
Mhm.
these are great answers. Oh, fabulous.
Yeah, and I
Get
I
to
do
work
think that
before everybody else. Ooh.
getting there early or staying late is really helpful. Like I said, I always used to be one of the first, and now in this job, I'm always one of the last. Um, which sometimes it's sad when you're the only car in the parking lot, but it's okay. Your car does not get lonely. Um,
Sometimes it's nice to have that quiet period, though, because I often am the last person out of the building, and it's nice because it's quiet and you are able to actually focus on what you need to get done, so that when you get home, you're not carting your whole big bag with you of all the stuff at home. You can leave it at
yes,
work. And
yes.
that's one of those work balance with life things that
Well, and
happens.
depending on what's going on in your life too, that may dictate a
Yeah.
lot of when you have to do much of your work. You have kids who are really active and they have lots of things going on after
Yeah.
school. Well, you may need to go get them where they need to go, but then, oh, maybe this half hour period where they're in activities, you can sit down and you can get some quality work done. I have graded more than my fair share of
Yeah.
papers during dance class. um,
Yeah, and you do have to try to work with your own schedule and your own life and figure the balance out. Okay, protecting that time. Here is other than saying no, here is my number one thing. Do not spend all your time in the teacher's lounge. There are far too many people in the teacher's lounge that are what I think of as energy vampires. You go in and it's a whole list of litany of what's not right and how cranky they are, and no, their husband's not treating them well, or no, their wife has left them. None of that is drama that you need. But what I also say is try to go to the teacher's lounge maybe once or twice a week, because if you don't go, they're going to talk about you. And that makes it harder to collaborate when people are gossiping about you. So it's find a balance between not going and getting sucked into some of the drama that happens. And then the other part of it is you do need to go, because that's a nice way to make an interaction that's social and positive and help you with other things that you might want to get done. been in the field long enough that one of my colleagues, when we were trying to move students with disabilities, particularly hearing impaired kids, into quote mainstream classes, which we would now call an inclusion class, used to literally hang out in the teacher's lounge with fresh baked cookies or brownies. And the idea being that she would make friends and then say, you know, you'd be a really great teacher for blah, 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 blah student on my caseload. Can we at least try it and have them come to your classroom? And more times than not, she was actually successful in getting that done. So again, the teacher's lounge is a bigger issue than you think. So just keep that in mind. You want to put planning on your calendar and treat it like a true appointment or a meeting. A lot of times that's the thing that we don't protect. We say, oh, it's my planning time. Yeah, I'll answer these phone calls, or somebody will stop in our office or our classroom and want to chat. When in fact, what we should be doing is saying, well, you know, I have an appointment, or this is blocked out time where I'm not doing those kinds of things. So again, that's important. When you're planning, don't do a lot of multitasking. The problem with multitasking is that you often lose focus. And the problem with it in terms of planning is that you need the time to really think through that sequence, think through the routines that you're going to use, and think through how things are going to happen. And since it's more thinking than tasking, when you're multitasking, you're not getting the full use of your thinking. So try to kind of limit that or don't do much of it. And
Sorry, I
then,
didn't mean to click twice.
oh, that's okay. Closing your classroom door. I saw that on several people's lists in the chat, which is absolutely true. And then you will notice that we put a variety of things up here about identify your own time wasters. You know, for some of you, it may be Candy Crush. Some of it may be Angry Birds. I will totally cop to the fact that I spend far too much time watching puppy videos on YouTube. It's always there. We have our computers. We do it. So now I'm at the point where we talk about setting alarms. I allow myself 5 minutes of a cute puppy video when I have X amount of time, so that I don't all of a sudden stop watching puppy videos and realize that 2 hours went by and I didn't get anything done except watching the cute puppies. So
When you actually sit down to start your planning, you've got that protected time. You want to make sure that you have all of your materials handy so that you don't have to get up and search for something, because then that becomes a time waster. And we'd also suggest, kind of along the line of not multitasking, complete one thing before you move on to another one. But there are going to be times you missed some material you need. So if you can't finish, make a note about what you need so that you can pick that up again immediately when you sit back down to plan. It can also be really helpful if you keep your lesson plans and your materials and the reflections you had on a lesson from one year to the next. It could be you completely change that lesson, but you can at least start from what those reflections were and make use of your knowledge of what went well, what didn't go well, because you're not going to remember if it's an entire year from teaching one lesson on ancient China to another lesson on ancient China. And then finally, collaborate. There are a lot of schools I've been in where an entire like third grade team works together, or an entire 10th grade English group works together, and they split up and share units with each other. You may still personalize it and make it your own, but especially in the beginning, take any and all help and resources you can get.
one of the next, and I will say near our end, one of the most important things to start doing is when you start planning for next year. And truthfully, you start doing that now. Begin by making notes on your lesson plans about any changes you might want to make the next time you teach this lesson. So, for example, you're teaching a math lesson and you realize that you're teaching slope of the line, and you basically need to make sure that they understand how the equation deals with rise over run. You might make a few notes on that lesson plan, and then you're going to drop that either into a file folder or even a binder, because you're probably going to teach that again next year. Make additional or seek additional materials from experienced teachers. We are all pack rats. We all have tons of stuff that we have stored for we're going to use it again, and most of us will share. So somebody who maybe taught what you're teaching before may be willing to let you sit down and copy their file of all the stuff they have, or they may even have it on a computer and just shoot it to you electronically. Always ask and make sure you're polite about it, but you'd be amazed at how many people will help you. Keep folders on ideas that you may get from professional development. Lots of teacher trainings happen and lots of things go on where you think, wow, that'd be a really good idea if I ever taught blah, blah, blah. Well, you might not be teaching it right now, but down the road you might be. So hold on to that stuff. Keep it in a file folder, keep it somewhere where you can get to it because it may be something you can adapt or use. And then my favorite thing is over the summer, and I know we're only in October, so thinking about June seems like a long way off, but over the summer for a little bit, you can sleep and relax, sleep in late, watch a little, daytime drama, however you define that on television. I personally think of being at the beach with a nap, but then before you get ready, give yourself a little downtime, but then when you're starting to feel a little bit better, evaluate how this year went. Think about how you used your time. Think about setting goals for next year. Think about what changes you might want to make. Invest time to complete a model unit or multiple model units. And again, going back to routines, create your units with similar structures to how your routines might work in your classroom. Makes everything a little more efficient, but over the summer, you've got time to twiddle with that and tweak it and think about it. And once you get it kind of really solid, then it's really easy to make some other ones as well. Plan to protect your time. Summer is much shorter than we think it's going to be. I always wake up in the middle of July going, oh my God, classes are going to be starting in a month and I'm not ready. Teachers week, you never have enough time to get it all done in 1 week. So you are going to have to invest some time when you have some downtime in the summer. But the truth is that little investment over the summer can pay huge dividends when things get crazy. Maybe your caseload goes up by 4 children. Maybe you get switched to a different grade level. Maybe all of a sudden you're on a different kind of committee that they really need your expertise on, and your workload gets more complicated. So you want to make sure that that little time that you've invested in getting the stuff you've got to do done over the summer will give you that little extra time to do the other things that come up unexpectedly during the school year.
So we just kind of want to come back full circle as we finish and say, this is the reason we protect our time. We want to make sure that we keep our focus on students and we protect our planning time, because ultimately what we do during that planning time is make ourselves better to make students better and to improve what we do for students. So any questions?
I noticed that somebody wrote about the notepad outside their door. I love that idea. I've seen multiple teachers do it. It is a fabulous
Yeah.
idea. It works really well.
Oh, Naya, you are not on.
Sorry about that. That was really awesome. There's actually some questions, so I'm just going to read through some if you guys don't mind. Let's see, the first one. How do you juggle lesson planning, professional development, and saving time for social life?
I think that there's not I think there's not one answer to that. I do truly think that it depends on the person. Professional development, especially your first year, you're going to be hit hard with lots and lots of opportunities. Ask questions about which ones you have to go to, which ones are highly recommended, and which ones you can opt out of. I would say, don't opt out of anything related to the direct functionality of your job. Like if you're a special ed teacher, you need to know how to use the IEP program. That's vital. But there are other things that you might be able to opt out of. And I also think it's a good idea, when you're scheduling that planning time, make sure you block out time for whatever is going to help you remember that you have a life outside of teaching. So for me, we had dinner every Tuesday night with some friends. And so every Tuesday night is, okay, I am leaving work at X time and I am not picking anything else up again after that. And so I had tidbits of protected time for me and fun and social life, just like I protected planning time.
Oh, nice. So balancing both of them.
Yeah.
Giving them like equal weight.
Well, and I would also say not just your social life, but you do need to find that time to protect for yourself, just that quiet time. Some people like to get their nails done. You need to find time just for that basic something for yourself that maybe isn't social, but a little quiet, because there's a lot going on in your life that first year. I mean, it's hard.
Yeah. Another question. How can this book specifically help new teachers successfully navigate their first school year?
So I'll tell you, the reason that we wrote this book was we saw people with the same struggles all the time, and we work with new teachers all the time. That's what we do. And so we basically wanted to write them a cheat sheet. And so that's really what it is. We think of it as a cheat sheet. It's okay, you learned this in your coursework, but you don't remember that because that was a year ago, 2 years ago. You weren't under the stress, you weren't under the pressure. And so this is someplace you can go and be reminded, ooh, what are the components of a good goal? Or I'm being observed. How do I get through that? What should I ask? They want me to ask them questions about what they should look for when they come and observe me. How do I approach that?
Nice.
The other thing that's really nice that we thought about was checklists, because again, you were taught this stuff in school, but we taught it in a way, and for many of us, that's very long and complicated. And now we've reduced it down to here's what you really need to do.
That's super cool. And this webinar really helped because it kind of ties them together. I really like you guys said about like color coding and having sticky notes everywhere. Super cool. And then I guess our last question will be, what is one tip that you think all teachers need to know?
Depends on the day of the week. Lori, you can take this one first.
My standard answer to that question is keep your focus on your students and get to know them. If you know who your students are and what they need, all the other stuff that you've told us will come up, because you'll figure out that that's where the rubber meets the road, is staying focused on your students. So everything you've learned as a teacher, know your students is the most important.
I'll say another good one is remember that teaching is not a silo. And so
yes.
Ask for help, ask for ideas, ask for people to work with you, because that more than anything else is going to alleviate your workload and stress in your first year.
Yeah,
Nice.
absolutely.
Well, it looks like that's all the time we have. Lori and Elizabeth, I just want to say thank you so much for today's fantastic presentation. And thank you to everyone for attending. We will announce the winners of our giveaway through email tomorrow. So be sure to look out in your emails for that. We'll pick 3 winners. Also, don't forget you can save 20% at brookspublishing.com using the code edwebph. You can get this amazing book, and some of like the figures you saw, they're in this book. So feel free to check that out on our website. The code will expire on November 30th. And then you can also email Elizabeth and Lori. These slides will be available on our page in the archive section. So if you want to use these emails, you can reach out to them. Feel free to ask questions. Be sure to join us on November 7th at 3 p.m. for our next edWebinar, Planning the Transition to Employment, Tips, Tools, and Strategies, presented by Dr. Wendy Parent-Johnson, Laura Owens, and Dr. Richard Parent-Johnson. And then again, just one last thing, be sure to join Teaching All Students. It's our free EdWeb community here. You'll get so many different things. We have archives of our past webinars. We'll have archives of this one, and feel free to ask questions. We have like little discussion areas on there as well. And we always post freebies and different things. But again, thank you guys so much for joining us. And I wish you guys all the best with your days. Thank you. Thanks, Elizabeth and Lori.
Bye.
Bye.